Okay, so you want to own a movie studio in Hollywood, and I understand completely because it might be the most glamorous business on the planet. Your name on the water tower, red carpets, movie stars taking your calls, the little logo that lights up before every film. You'd be selling dreams for a living. So here's the brutal little secret hiding behind all that glamour. Most movies lose money, not some, most. The studio business is one where you spend $200 million, cross your fingers, and frequently watch it vanish in a single weekend. And yet the biggest companies on Earth just spent the last year in a savage bidding war to own one of these studios, throwing around numbers like 80 billion, $110 billion. So the puzzle you need to solve before you spend a dime is this. How can a business where most of the products flop be worth more than almost anything else in entertainment? By the end of this, you'll know exactly where the real money is hiding, and it's not where you think. So let's go shopping. At the cheap end of the catalog is the independent studio. This isn't a lot with a water tower. It's basically a smart office full of people who develop scripts, raise money for each film separately, and hire everything else, the cameras, the crews, the special effects per project. You could set one up for a few $1,000,000. The dream here is to make one small film that hits big, the horror movie that costs $5 million and makes $300. And honestly, that dream comes true just often enough to keep everyone playing. But most indies live one flop away from the end. One step up is the real production studio, the kind that makes several films a year and has actual money behind it. Now you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars in play at any moment, because a single modern blockbuster can cost $200 to $300 million to make before a single ticket is sold. And at the very top of the catalog sit the giants, the names everyone knows. Disney, Universal, Warner Bros., Paramount, Sony. These are not really movie companies anymore. They're century-old vaults of characters and stories, and you cannot buy one for a few hundred million. You buy one of these for tens of billions of dollars if the family that owns it will even sell. So where do you actually buy in? You can build a studio from scratch, which is slow and terrifying because you have no track record and every bank knows the odds. Or you buy an existing studio, and here's where you learn the first real lesson of this business. When you buy a studio, you're not really buying its next movie. Nobody can predict the next movie. You're buying its library, the thousands of films and shows it already owns, forever. That's the treasure. The trap hiding inside a studio for sale is usually the opposite. A studio gets sold when its recent movies have been bombing and its owner is bleeding cash and wants out. So you have to be able to tell the difference between a studio that's genuinely dying and one that's just had a bad couple of years but is still sitting on a golden vault. Get that wrong, and you bought a very expensive logo attached to a money pit. And then there's the distressed aisle, which in Hollywood is enormous right now, because streaming has turned the whole industry upside down and left a lot of once mighty studios wounded and for sale. There's always a reason they're cheap. Usually it's a mountain of debt and a string of expensive flops. But buried in that same wounded company is often a library worth more than the whole asking price, which is exactly why the giants circle these deals like sharks. Here's how strange this business gets in the distressed aisle. Studios have actually taken finished movies, films that were completely done and ready to release, and simply buried them, never showing them to anyone, because the tax write-off was worth more than the movie. Think about that. Sometimes the most profitable thing you can do with a finished film is pretend it never existed. That alone should tell you this is not a normal business where you make a thing and sell it. It's a business about assets and accounting, wearing the costume of art. First, though, your first bill, and this is where new owners get their stomachs turned. Say you greenlight one big movie. The budget is $200 million. You think that's the cost. It isn't. Because once the movie is finished, you have to convince the entire planet to go see it, and marketing a global blockbuster can cost another $100 to $200 million on top. Posters, trailers, TV ads, stars flying around the world doing interviews. So your $200 million movie is really a $350 million bet before anyone buys a ticket. And here's the part that truly hurts. When someone buys a ticket, you don't keep it. The movie theater keeps roughly half of every dollar in America, and even more overseas. In China, you might keep only a quarter. So if you want to earn back your $350 million, and you only keep about half of each ticket, your movie has to sell something like $700 million of tickets around the world just to break even. Which gives us rule number one of the movie business: a movie doesn't make money when it earns back its budget. It makes money when it earns back about 2.5 times its budget, and most movies never get close. And there's an extra twist that makes it even sneakier. Something insiders jokingly call Hollywood accounting. A studio can make a movie that grossed hundreds of millions and still, on paper, claim the film lost money because they pile every possible cost onto it: interest, overhead, fees paid to themselves. This is partly why you'll hear that a giant hit somehow never turned a profit. So even the wins are murkier than they look. And if you're ever promised a share of a movie's profit, a veteran will tell you to demand a share of the revenue instead, because in Hollywood, profit is a number the studio gets to invent. So how does the money actually come in? And here's the reveal that unlocks everything. A single movie is a terrible bet. It's a coin flip, where the coin costs $350 million. No sane person would bet their whole fortune on one flip. So the studios don't. The trick is that a studio isn't in the business of making a movie. It's in the business of owning a library. Think of it like a casino. Any single spin of the wheel can lose. But the casino doesn't care about one spin because it owns the whole floor, and it plays thousands of times. A studio works the same way. It makes many films, accepts that most will disappoint, prays that one or two become giant hits, and then, and this is the magic part, it owns all of them forever. Because a movie isn't done making money when it leaves theaters. That's when the real, quiet, endless money begins. After the cinema comes streaming deals, cable TV, airline screens, digital rentals, DVDs for the collectors, and licensing the characters onto toys, t-shirts, video games, and theme park rides. A film can keep earning for 50 years or more. Star Wars made about $10 billion at the box office over the decades, and reportedly over $40 billion in merchandise. Read that again. The toys made 4 times what the movies did. The movie was never really the product. The movie was an advertisement for a character you would then own and sell forever. So who's your real customer? Not the person buying a movie ticket. That person barely covers your costs. Your real customer is future you, licensing your library over and over for decades, and the streaming giant who will one day pay a fortune just to have your characters on their service. The ticket buyer is how the story gets famous. The library is how you get rich, slowly, quietly, for the rest of your life. And this is exactly why the whole industry has been flipping upside down. For years, the streaming companies like Netflix tried to build their own libraries from scratch, spending billions inventing brand new characters. Then they looked at the math and realized something. Building a beloved character that lasts 50 years takes decades and mostly fails, while an old studio already has a whole vault of them, proven, finished, loved. So the smart money stopped trying to build new vaults and started buying old ones. That single realization is what set off the giant bidding wars you've been hearing about. Nobody's fighting over who can make the best new movie. They're fighting over who gets to own the characters everyone already loves. In a world with 100 streaming services all desperate for something to show you, the studio that owns Batman and Harry Potter and Superman doesn't have to win. It just has to own and wait for everyone else to come pay rent. Now, the graveyard and Hollywood's is legendary, because when movies fail, they fail spectacularly and in public. Start with the most famous tombstone of all, a film called John Carter from Disney in 2012. It was supposed to launch a giant new franchise. Instead, thanks to a confusing title, an unknown lead, and marketing nobody understood, it became the biggest single movie bomb in history, with Disney taking a write-down of around $200 million. $200 million gone on one film. The lesson: It doesn't matter how big or rich or smart your studio is. A single movie can vaporize an ordinary person's lifetime of earnings in one weekend, and you will never fully know why until it's too late. The second grave is more recent and more chilling, because it shows even golden geese die. Marvel superhero movies were, for a decade, the closest thing to a license to print money that Hollywood ever had. And then in 2023, a Marvel film called The Marvels came out and collapsed so badly that one industry analyst called it an unprecedented Marvel box office collapse. Around the same time, sequels to guaranteed hits, a Joker sequel, a new Flash movie, each lost their studios something like $200 million. The lesson: there are no safe bets in this business. The moment you assume a formula can't fail, the audience changes its mind and teaches you a very expensive lesson. The third grave isn't a single movie. It's a whole studio, and it's the most important story in Hollywood right now, because it proves this entire video. Warner Bros., one of the most storied studios in history, home to Batman, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, years of debt and flops left it wounded and up for sale. And in late 2025, the giants pounced. Netflix agreed to buy its studio and streaming business in a deal valuing it around $82 billion. Then Paramount jumped in with a hostile bid and after a brutal bidding war ended up agreeing to buy the whole company for around $110 billion in early 2026. Now ask yourself the obvious question. Why would anyone pay $110 billion for a studio famous lately for flops? The answer is the whole point. They weren't buying the flops. They were buying the vault. A century of characters, more than 15,000 films and shows, Batman and Harry Potter and Bugs Bunny that can be licensed and streamed and sold forever. The lesson, and it's the secret of the entire industry. Nobody buys a studio for the movies it's about to make. They buy it for the movies it already owns. So let's calculate how much you'll actually earn. You've bought a mid-sized studio and you're running it for a few years. In the optimistic scenario, you have a good run. You release a slate of movies, most do okay or lose a little, but one of them catches fire and becomes a real hit, earning you a few $100 million in profit all by itself. That one winner pays for all the losers and then some. And better still, it becomes a franchise. So now you've got sequels, toys, a streaming deal, maybe a theme park ride, all quietly adding to your library's value for decades. In this scenario, you don't just make money this year. You've added a permanent money-printing character to your vault, and the whole studio is suddenly worth far more than you paid. This is the dream, and it's real, and it happens just often enough. Now, the realistic scenario, which is where most studio owners actually live. You release your slate, and it's a rough couple of years. Your big $200 million tentpole underperforms, a sequel you were sure about flops, and your marketing costs were brutal. On the actual movies, you're deep in the red, tens or hundreds of millions in the hole. Your library still earns steadily in the background, which is the only thing keeping you alive. But the exciting part of the business, the new films, is a bloodbath. And this is the honest truth of the industry. For most players, the new movies are a costly, glamorous gamble that mostly loses, subsidized by the boring old library that quietly wins. This is education, not financial advice. And the reality is that the same studio can look like a genius one year and a disaster the next, because you're betting hundreds of millions on whether strangers will love something you can't test until it's finished. If this was useful, subscribe and drop a comment. If you ran a studio, would you bet big on original ideas nobody's seen before, or play it safe with sequels and reboots of stuff people already know? I read every one. Next in this series, the economics of owning a professional sports team. Another business where owners happily lose money on the game because the real prize is the asset going up in value. Because here's what you actually bought. You did not buy a business that makes movies. You bought a vault, and you pay a fortune every year to add a few new items to it, knowing most of them will be worthless, and praying one becomes a treasure that pays for everything. The films that flop are the price of admission. The one that hits, and the century of hits already sitting in the vault, that's the real business. Hollywood sells the whole world the magic of the new movie, But the smart money was never on the new movie. It was on owning the old ones, forever, and quietly renting them back to the world for the next 100 years.